to actually arrive at this day when we're all formally leaping off the cliff together. So a lot has gone into creating this day, and so before we get too far into this, I just thought we'd go around and do a quick round of introductions, and then I'll say just a couple of things before our competent consultants take us away. But I think I wanted to offer a couple of people the chance to introduce themselves first and say anything they might want to around this, because they've both been integral to getting this off the ground. And that's Johanna Parton from CNCA and Nils Moe. So Johanna, are you on?
I am on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi. Yeah, I didn't plan to say anything, so apologies. I should have been a little bit more prepared. But I am, Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance is really excited that this is moving forward, and the Alliance sees the decarbonization as thermal systems as a critical challenge that all cities need to overcome. So we're really excited that you guys are moving forward with this.
Thanks for joining us today, Johanna. And Nils? Nils, are you there? Saw you sign on. You might be on the mute. Why don't we, while Nils is finding his way to the mute button, why don't we have each of the consulting teams that are on and their staff introduce themselves, maybe starting Nate with you folks and Neil from Meister Consulting Group.
Sure thing. Yeah, my name is Nate Grady. I'm with Meister Consultants Group, which is based out of Boston, Mass, if you guys don't know us. We are certainly excited to be here and have been doing this work on renewable heating and cooling for a while, which Neil can speak a little bit more to. But the traction that particularly this project has been getting and the scale that things seem to be progressing towards is really, really exciting, and looking forward to seeing where it goes with you all.
Neil?
Hey everybody, this is Neil. Yep, hey, it's Neil Vea here. Good to touch base with everybody. I think I've chatted to all of y'all at this point in one capacity or another, but had a really great time working with many of you at the summit last, I think, October or November, and very excited to be charging ahead with these roadmaps that we're developing together here. But yeah, always happy to chat, so look forward to talking later today and in the future.
Great. And is there anybody else from the Meister group on today?
I think just the two of us.
Okay, great. Sarah and Jim, will you want to introduce your team?
Yeah, so I'm having some audio issues. Does everyone else hear clearly? Because mine's all kind of jumbled, but you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
I do. This is Yinka from DC.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead. I might switch out my phones after I pass it back to the next speaker. But okay, so hi, I'm Sarah Moe. I'm calling from DNVGL, and we're leading Meister, the project management of this project, and it's a really exciting time for us in our group in sustainable buildings and communities. We're, as well as at the corporate level at DNVGL, really focusing on the energy transition and seeing cities at the policy level and at the implementation level, just going after electrification and really working hard we are dedicated to work with you all on the long-term policy view while things are looking very short-sighted and narrow-minded. And at the federal level, we're just really excited to be here doing this work and focusing on the electrification and thermal decarbonization. So from my team, there will be a few of us. Jim, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself, but I'm not sure who else is all on the line. Ben Butterworth is here in the room with me. So go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. Jim Leahy. I'm a consultant here working with Sarah. So I'm also located in the Boston area for DNVGL. And we're just very, I think, excited about this project and the prospects of this project and helping all the different cities move these types of programs forward. So look forward to working with everyone.
Anybody else from DNVGL want to introduce themselves?
Hi, I'm Lauren Timor. I'm also in the Oakland office working with the DNVGL team. And yeah, we're really excited to get started on this project.
And this is Ben Butterworth. I'm also in the Oakland office working with DMVGL's Sustainable Buildings and Community team.
This is Betty Cito. Hello, everyone. I'm also with DMVGL.
Excellent. We might have a few guests I'm noticing from the attendees. And so I also should note for you that on the GoToMeeting button, you can see who's in the call with the sort of icon, human icon heads over there. And then right below that is a little dialogue bubble. And that's a place that you can go. And any time during this call, you could be chatting out, and that will be seen by us all. So if you have questions or comments, you're also welcome to add questions right in. So we're going to let people mute and unmute as they see the need to. And so I think we might have a few other folks who aren't. I'm going to ask the cities to all introduce themselves in a second. But before we do that, do we have any other participants who aren't either in the cities or in the two consulting groups? I think I might see somebody from DOE on the call or with us. Okay.
I think Nils, are you on? You want to say hello?
Hey there.
There you go.
Hi, everybody. Nils Mo from USDN here. Hopefully you can hear me. Just unmuted myself. But
yep.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Really excited about this project. And yeah, I talk about this project wherever I go, brag about the work that you all are doing. And it's really, truly transformative work. And just happy to be part of this conversation.
Great. Thanks for joining today, Nils. So I'm going to do just a really quick set of framing. Anybody else want to dive in before we introduce the cities?
Sorry, Brett. This is Johanna again. I don't know if Susanna Sutherland is on the call, but I just wanted to say thank you to her too, because this has been a complex set of funders and organizers and so forth that has all come together really seamlessly under one mission and vision. And Susanna has been the fund manager on the CNCA and USDN side that's been helping to make that happen. So I just wanted to say thank you to her.
Yeah, and if we don't have her on the call today, I hope somebody can convey that to her directly, because it could not be overstated how much work she's done to make this happen. So thank you. Okay, I'm going to give a just real quick framing of this effort, and then I'm going to ask the cities to introduce themselves. I'd like to ask each of the sort of lead persons from the cities to introduce themselves, and then invite their teams to introduce themselves. And then I'd like each of the city leads, if they will, to just say a little bit about kind of where you are in the process so far. So, and Boulder is going to go last on that, because I'm about to give you this little, hopefully, inspirational intro to this process. That was my charge. I hope I don't fumble the ball here. So here we go. I think you hear it in the way that some of the other folks have talked about their excitement of this, but I just want to underscore a couple of points. This isn't just a process to figure out how we can get a few people to adopt heat pumps. This is really a process, I think we all know, to figure out how cities can drive a transformative process that ultimately creates a whole market transformation that helps people have a path to get off natural gas and fuel oil. And it's based on the premise that we're probably not going to get leadership from many other places, especially in the near term, and that cities are the ones that hopefully can really lead some change here, and that perhaps most interesting, that cities working together can aggregate their capacities, their information, and their market scales to actually drive change in the marketplace. So it's not an understatement to say that there are literally dozens, if not hundreds, of different cities and entities that are watching this project, because we're all, of course, aware of the urgency to create positive, transformative change in a short duration of time. So when I said we were jumping off a cliff, I in no way anticipate that we're going down after we jump off that cliff. I actually have packed paragliders in all of your backpacks, and so hopefully we are actually picking up an updraft and we are soaring from here. And that's why I'm super, super excited, given that we have very high aspirations, that we have two very, very skilled, resourced, and gifted firms that have agreed to work not just with us but with each other to try to make this happen. So I want to underscore that we are doing something that's new in a whole bunch of different ways, from the technology side to just how we collaborate together as cities, to how we actually try to influence the private sector marketplace. And we don't have a known roadmap for that. We're making it up as we go. I'm so excited that today is the process of trying to create a structured capacity building piece that we all share and work on together. And then I'm so eager to see how each of us in our different cities take and run with that. So just want to keep emphasizing, though, that nobody knows how to do this. So I hope that everyone stays very deeply engaged and keeps offering up their perspectives, their opinions, and their resources to helping us make this successful. And so with that, maybe I would turn first to the folks in Burlington, and then maybe DC, and then New York, to introduce themselves and their teams and where they're at, and then we'll bat last here in Boulder. So Jennifer?
Yeah, hi Brett. Jennifer here, along with Chris, the Director of Energy Services from BED, and I guess sort of 4 quick points, starting with the fact that, of course, Burlington has this strategic plan to transition both in thermal, electric, and transportation to net zero energy. So this is fitting in beautifully with this sort of big, grander master plan. We have a contract signed with Radiant Labs now, so that we're getting that kicked off. And in short, Radiant Labs is going to take our assessors and permit data, sort of distill it down into a bunch of camps that will help us understand sort of who needs what from a residential perspective. So who's got the old roofs, who's got the old boilers, sort of, and where the opportunity lies for heat pumps, but other energy efficient technologies as well. We have a new GROW, or we're launching what we're referring to as a GROW solar program here in Burlington. So we're watching the sort of solar industry to do its thing, and the electric department has been out of the picture, with the exception, of course, of getting calls from customers who are saying, I don't understand, I don't know if I should be doing a PPA or if I should be buying flat out or whatever. So they definitely see us as trusted partners. And so we are devising a way by which we can sort of monetize this relationship and support, and while simultaneously supporting solar. And we see the thermal heat pump component as sort of the next tier of us supporting the solar piece, kind of like the bundling work that we refer to so much in Boulder, Brett. And I guess the last thing I'll say, and then let Chris chime in, who knows better than me about all this stuff, is some work that we're doing on a passive house a house that is not passive yet. This is an 1899 Victorian house in Burlington, 1,800 square feet, classic residential property. We have very old housing stock in Burlington, and we've got an owner that is going passive. We're helping him through this process. We're going to very closely document the process, and we're going to sort of break it up into tiers so that if other property owners want to come to us with doing similar work on their own homes, we can sort of offer, well, you can take track A, B, or C. C can get you all the way to passive. And we'll have different financing packages and sort of technological support available for each of those 3 tracks all the way up the passive scale. And of course, the heat pump component will be a part of that as well. So those are a couple of things that are happening for us. Chris, I want to introduce Chris though and let him add anything to that, and just reiterate how excited we are to be working on this and how great the timing is from our standpoint.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. This is great, and the thermal decarbonization initiatives, I think I've said on other calls, is just falls so beautifully into our sweet spot of where we're trying to go. So thanks to everybody. And the other thing that Burlington's doing is we're about to become an established 2030 district. We have about 1.5 million square feet already signed up. And where this all falls is going to be helpful as well. So timing couldn't be better from our perspective.
Great, thank you so much. Really appreciate all the work you've already contributed to making this possible. Olyanka, how about DC?
Sure. So I'll begin by saying hello, fellow human icon heads. I kind of like that term. So again, I think we can essentially echo everything that Burlington is saying. We're very excited about this. We have a lot that's happening around solar. I think the one that may be most of interest to everyone here is that we have legislation that mandates we provide enough solar energy to reduce electricity consumption or energy consumption by 50% for 100,000 households in the district. Some rough estimates suggest that's anywhere from 240 to maybe a little over 300 megawatts by 2032. So that's already ongoing. So to combine this initiative along with that is actually very exciting to help us drive towards to really getting as close to net zero carbon neutral as possible. So this is indeed exciting. What we've done so far has been very promising. We've identified stakeholders, we've engaged some stakeholders. For example, there is the Metropolitan Washington Plumbing and Heating and Cooling Association, which because of this I actually had to discover, so I wasn't aware of that. We have positive support from our sister agencies, so that is going swimmingly. So I hope to pass on some information to our consultant team to help look at that. So that is great. I'm trying to think what else I can add. Yeah, I think again I can echo everything that Burlington is saying. We're making some headway. It does sort of feel like jumping off a cliff, but I think we're finding the wind beneath our wings. Respect to the team. So we're all sort of at our desks. I'm at mine. I did look on the human icon head thing, and I saw one of my colleagues, Michael Negussi, on, who maybe he can talk a little bit about one of the programs that he's working on. So the thing I'd like to add very quickly, in addition to identifying sort of our stakeholders and working with our tax office, our permitting office, we're also, as part of this conversation, seeing places where we can do some intervention. So for example, our agency manages the emergency heating, furnace, and water heater program, where essentially low-income people would approach us and say, hey, we need some help. Our furnace is no longer working. And so that provides us an opportunity to have a play that says, look, we'd like to push more efficient heat pumps where applicable to this population. So that's another thing that is beginning to sort of come into relief. So yeah, Michael, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that. Maybe not. Okay, well, he might be on mute, so I'll leave it there, and then as we get into discussion, I'll chime back in.
Thanks so much, Olyanka. Thanks for DC's participation. Laura, New York City?
Yeah, thanks. This is Laura Tajima from New York City. I'm representing the team here today. We've been working very closely with Meister thus far, kind of really working on data and kind of really objectives of data as well too. So sending them kind of, I would say, you know, a lot of data to kind of sift through so we can really identify how we can kind of scale this up in our 1 to 4 family homes. So, you know, I think this is very exciting. You know, we recognize that, you know, one thing that we are kind of realizing is that kind of more in the short term, we would love to see this scaling up of like the heat pump DHW systems. And long term, we recognize, you know, the importance of electrifying heat as well too. So, you know, one thing that we've been kind of thinking about is you know, is there a PPA structure we can explore for an air source heat pump DHW? And then, you know, on top of that, we are also kind of looking at kind of where can we start scaling up air source heat pumps in some of the larger buildings, and we have a couple of programs that we work with that are trying to kind of engage with buildings during times of of decision making, and seeing how we can kind of frame the heat pump decision in context of their decisions about their retrofits. So yeah, we're all heat pump really interested. We're working really closely with NYSERDA as well too. They have a lot of work going on with heat pumps as well. So they have a demo project with 20 homes in Brooklyn that we're kind of serving on an advisory board for. They're also doing that in upstate as well too. So hopefully getting a lot of good findings from that project as well. So my team, who I believe I'm the only one on the call right now, are Jenna Tatum, John Lee, and then we have kind of Allie Levine, who's working on data with us, Ross, and maybe a few others that jump on because we all love heat pumps here.
Awesome, thank you. Say hi to all your colleagues for us.
I will.
Maybe I'll have our Boulder team introduce themselves. We have a good representation on today. Maybe starting with you, Jen.
Hi all, I'm Jen Harper here. I'm a program manager with Clear Result, and we administer Boulder County's Energy Smart program, which is energy advising service that's offered free to Boulder County homeowners. So we are excited to help implement these efforts for the city of Boulder.
Great, thanks. And my close colleague in the city of Boulder, Elizabeth, are you on?
I am, Brett. Thanks. Hi, everyone. This is Elizabeth Fasadka. I team with Brett and Jen, our contractors who run programs for us. We have a great foundation here of energy efficiency programs and codes, and I think this project is just going to add to that innovation that we're always looking for the next great thing to implement for our community, and knowing that we're partnering with cities across the country just makes it that much more impactful. And so I'm very thankful for the collaboration in this project. So Brett, kudos to you and the whole team.
Well, thanks. Elizabeth has been a part of Boulder's energy efficiency programs for many years and helped actually create the whole energy advisor model. So it's really exciting to take that model and look at how we can continue to innovate there. We're very fortunate also in Boulder to have a couple of extremely bright and thoughtful graduate students at CU Boulder who are in the Masters of the Environment program, who are essentially helping to partially staff this through the summer. So John and Malika, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm John Bratton. I'm looking forward to working on this project. It's been great so far, and we're very excited about it.
And this is Malika. I'm also very excited to be working on this project for the next 6 or 7 months, and I think we'll really be doing some of the on-the-ground research, including identifying potential barriers to heat pump installation and helping to address those.
Great. Real quick I should mention that one of our very important partners, David Hachimanji from the Boulder County, won't be with us today, but it will be for the rest of the journey, and he's a core part of our team in the designing of our efforts. So just a quick update on our work so far. We've formed this team, most of whom are on the call today. We've created a work plan. John and Malika have taken the first shot at developing a stakeholder map. We're starting to fill that out. Thanks to Jen, who's actually personally in the market for a heat pump, we're also using this as an opportunity to do a little bit of mystery shopping, we're calling it, where John and Malika are actually calling through all of the local HVAC contractors just to see what their responses are when we say, hey, we want a heat pump. And that should actually give us a really interesting kind of initial baseline for what the customer experience might be out there. We're also following up to start looking at what we can find out about existing heat pump installations that have happened in Boulder and starting to do some case study work around that. We're also working on a pilot that's very similar, Jen and Chris, to something that you're thinking about, where we will identify up to 100 households that are interested in being part of a kind of vanguard group of looking at the roadmap to whole home energy systems change. So you call it maybe passive house as the end goal. We may call it fossil fuel free or something. We haven't figured out our branding around it. but we ought to stay in close contact because I think they look like very similar efforts. And then I also wanted to note that we were contacted by the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, and they are having one of their staff come out to help us organize a workshop that Elizabeth is helping to lead around commercial heat pump applications. There's some new technologies and systems that are coming out that might be possible there, and so it might be worth, those of you who are interested in looking at that side of it also will share that information. I also want to mention that we just heard about 2 weeks ago that Radiant Labs had applied to the DOE in a special program where the DOE provides money to a national lab to work with a private firm on something, and Radiant asked for money from the labs to actually build out the energy modeling for the multifamily units, and it appears that they're likely to get that. So this conversation that we've been having with the cities who have a lot of multi-unit housing, I think we may have a route to starting to get that ResStock database built up so that we can do that energy modeling in the small multifamily area. So that's it from us. Thanks everybody for sitting through a relatively long intro. The rest of the webinars won't have this long intro, but I thought we all thought it was important that we kind of get everybody a chance to introduce themselves and get oriented. And from this point, it's all work. So with that, Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you. Oh, I'm not sure. All work and play.
Okay. All right. So yes, I think we got to keep the work and play alive for the love of heat pumps. So today, I want to point you to the other document, the other PDF, if you want the details of the overview of the modules. I don't have it open here, but the other PDF that was attached to the meeting has the outline of the 4 modules we'll be going over. And it kind of has, that there are 8 pieces of the strategic planning process that we'll be taking you all through over the next few months. And we've divided them up into chunks. So module 1 has A, B, and C, which is what we're going to dive into now. So I'm going to go ahead and do the overview. So for the love of heat pumps, I did put a heart there because, it can feel like a cold technology sometimes. But I wanted to start the overview by mentioning this work that we stand on the shoulders of. So I guess it's a little bit more of an intro, and I apologize, but I'll go quickly. So just to say that CNCA and USDN have invested heavily in this project, in this process, and so previously, just looking back a couple years, Energy System Transformation Framework was done by Inc., and built on that was the work that Boulder did called the Thermal Energy Decarbonization Strategies, where they had Snug Home come in and do their data aggregation and segmentation and come up with this really cool integrative bundling model where you guys have seen it, but you're looking at the energy efficiency, you're looking at PV, you're looking at electric vehicles, and putting it all together, looking at the possibilities there for zero emissions homes. So that was a really great report as well. After that was the Renewable Thermal Solutions to Scale in New England, which is something that's actually happening now. Meister's working with Boston and the surrounding cities on. So a project that essentially mirrors this one. And then last year in 2016, Integral came out with they called it the Integrated Whole Energy System Decarbonization Playbook. And so this is all great work. I wanted to just mention it and say that we are drawing from it, we are connecting to it, and this is just sort of it's what's the word? It's confirming the work, the research that's been done and the work that's been out there. So the integrative strategies that some of you cities mentioned that you are interested in connecting this to your solar programs and your resilience strategies, your distributed energy, your reduced energy, this makes sense as far as the energy system transformation frameworks go. So we're in this piece here where we're focusing on the thermal decarbonization arm of the energy system transformation framework. And there's a couple other grants at play. I didn't put them all in, but as you all know, we got to sit last fall with some of the heat pump manufacturers and really connect with their hearts and minds and see that they're on this team from the private sector side. And we look forward to doing that again in August or September of this year. And that was from Rockefeller Brothers. And as you all know as well, Summit has funded this round of data aggregation that we're working through now. So we're really grateful to just be able to keep moving this forward. And I also want to just give a shout out to Brett, who's been involved in each of these projects all the way through. He's put so much time and effort. So we're looking forward to Boulder really launching. And speaking of launching, his second child is about to launch. So we will miss Brett for anywhere between 6 and 12 weeks, starting next month sometime. So we want to welcome that baby into a better world. So thank you, Brett, for all your dedication.
Thanks, Sarah.
So, all right, let's jump in. No more intros here. So we're jumping into Module 1. So there's 3 pieces, A, B, and C. We have framing the initiative. So we're going to jump into why heat pumps in the framing of the energy transition. How heat pumps work, look at some of the technology details. That's what Meister's going to present next. Then we'll dive into mapping your system and forming your advisory board, so looking at who all is in your area, naming them, and sort of placing them in this in this sphere of influence, if you will. And if you're familiar with the Integral Playbook, they talked about that. So we'll be drawing on that in that section. And that will help you form your advisory board if you haven't already. And then we're going to look at some of the basic barriers and opportunities. Of course, we're going to ask you to take that further in your homework for the local context, but we also are going to just address some of what the typical barriers and opportunities are when we're talking about launching our heat pump programs.
Sarah,
and then, yeah.
I just wanted to note for everyone, while this first part, framing the initiative, may seem like it's review or even redundant for some of us, part of the reason that we're doing this and part of the reason that we're going through these slides is that this has all been built so that it can be support material that you can use as you go out to form advisory committees or to build stakeholder relationships. So think of all this as also materials that are available to you for your use.
Exactly. Thank you for saying that, and that's true throughout the modules. That we want you to take the pieces that you can get together your elevator pitch, so you can go out there and start recruiting and getting people to connect and align with this. So thanks for saying that. So the homework, we do have a significant amount of homework with each module, and it's okay because it's a shared workload. There's different leaders on each task, so it's not that the city is leading the homework tasks per se. So looking at Module 1, for example, the homework is in the other PDF, it's listed there more specifically about the details and the roles, each, who's leading and who's supporting. But so the first one is the forming of your advisory board, and the cities will lead that. The second piece is conducting the analysis of your local barriers and opportunities. And while the city's gonna lead that with their advisory board, we, the consultants, will be there by phone and sort of help facilitate that meeting. That will be your next advisory board meeting. Meanwhile, the consultants are leading the data aggregation piece. That'll be ongoing until hopefully the second module. It should be done by then. And then the fourth piece of homework is looking at the stakeholder map. We're going to start to pull out some key stakeholders we want to interview and do some qualitative analysis. So we'll ask you to make a list of people and a list of questions and start to sketch out what you want to learn from these actors, these key stakeholders. And then the last thing is the local case studies. So this is what we refer to as the installation baseline, and that's looking at installed heat pumps in your area, and the city will, and the advisory board will lead on pulling out some of these local case studies, but the consultants will lead on compiling the case studies. So that is where we're going to dive into all these pieces. That's what we're doing today, Module 1. Next month, Module 2, we're going to move into D&E. So we're going to do the market development assessment, establishing the baseline of heat pump systems installed to date, segmentation is looking forward. So finding that high value target in your area, and then we'll start to map strategies on how to launch and get heat pumps in those buildings. So the homework for Module 2 is going to be completing the installation baseline. So again, looking at how the heat pumps in your area are performing, then interviewing the local suppliers, installers, contractors, and then finalizing the building segmentation. And again, I want to ask you to interrupt me at any time and ask your question. You're not on mute, by me at least. So if you have any questions, please chime in. Okay, so Module 3, we're going to go to F and G. So we're going to be looking at start to develop the policies and programs based on the previous pieces of the strategic planning. So some cities might want to do sort of just the new policy and focus on drafting what that might look like. And then I heard from most of you, though, you want to do integrative programs. So you want to figure out how to link it to your solar and your energy efficiency programs and that kind of thing. We'll also be looking at identifying and quantifying the co-benefits. So in some cases, it makes more sense to message about the co-benefits than it does about climate and greenhouse gas emissions. So we'll look at that and the other policies that you might be able to build on or be aware that they're contradicting each other. And then developing the key partnerships and identifying incentives. So here we start to really leverage the private sector. We want the manufacturers and the other installers, contractors, the private sector in your area to put skin in the game, and we'll start developing the plans for outreach and training, the training dissemination plan, how you're going to get the sort of supply chain strengthened in your area. And that's where we will link back to the national industry development that Meister's leading, that began last fall at the RBF convening, and we'll link to that and sort of make this a national movement as much as local. So the homework coincides with those pieces. So you'll end up with identifying what your integrative program will look like, the marketing and training plan for the installers, and then we'll also identify the available incentives, start to tee up the third-party financing options, and quantify the co-benefits. So that'll be, again, not all led by you. We'll be splitting up who does what. You can see that in the other PDF. And then the fourth module here is the final piece, so developing the implementation plan. Here we'll basically put all the pieces together, build the roadmap for your renewable heating and cooling launch, and actually coordinate the partnerships necessary for financing, and we'll do lots of homework there. So develop the full plan. We're going to develop the engagement and outreach plan, and as well as the training dissemination plan. So we're going to, hopefully we'll have a messaging outreach kind of partner by this fourth module to help you frame what your outreach will look like to the key actors and segments that you've figured out through this process.
Sorry, this is Laura. Can I ask a quick question in terms of like timeline for these modules? Is that laid out somewhere?
Yeah, so sorry, actually it was on the kickoff call, but I didn't put it back in here, but they're monthly. So it's basically the third Thursday of every month. For the next 4 months, we'll go through these 4 modules. So we encourage you to have your advisory board meetings in between there to kind of, help move the homework pieces forward and whatnot. So we'll do that, and then in, let's see, so that's March, April, May, and June, and then in July we'll have a 5th webinar, but that will be not presenting content as much as synthesizing what we've learned and kind of putting it all together. And then in August, hopefully we're looking, I haven't got the final date yet, but to go to RBF, to Rockefeller Brothers for that manufacturers convening end of August, early September, something like that.
And Laura, you should have gotten invites for all those dates. If you haven't gotten those yet, let Sarah know. and that would be the true for anybody else on this call, that those invites have been formed. So if you haven't gotten them yet, make sure that you get to Sarah so that she can get those out to you. And just to underscore what Sarah said, this sort of kicked off last September when we had cities and the manufacturers meet in New York. It is our intention, and Neil is working quite actively. He's been maintaining the contacts with all those manufacturers. He's actively working based on questions that many of you helped to refine, to gather information from them about how they would be willing to participate, hopefully including financially and with other in-kind support. And I just want to say, and as the last piece, that the long play for what we're doing right now is ultimately to try to create a multi-year, probably multi-million-dollar proposal that would get us the kind of resources that we really need to take this to scale. We know that we don't have that kind of resources in what we've raised and what we're using so far, but we do have enough resources for us all collectively, both individually to get our own strategies together for our own cities, and then collectively, along with the manufacturers, we plan create a market transformation strategy that can really attract those bigger resources.
Great. Well, I will take that. Thank you so much, Brett and Sarah, for kind of laying all that out and getting us going. And we can, I think, dive into the first substantive section of this module. So, Sarah, if you want to advance one slide. Yeah, so before we get too deep into the details of launching a heat pump scaling initiative, we thought it'd be beneficial to back up a little bit and discuss the ways to frame the initiative as a whole to provide broader context for metropolitan scale renewable heating and cooling initiatives in general, and how to talk about how we got to heat pumps in the first place. So as Brett mentioned, I want to just reiterate that we know that you're all city policymakers, so for many of you these concepts and programs are your bread and butter. So I'll move kind of quickly through them, but just thought it'd be helpful to cover them to frame the initiative at large. So in the face of slow to develop national decarbonization efforts and now increasingly uncertain federal policy landscape, to put it lightly, local jurisdictions are increasingly taking the lead on combating climate change. This has taken the form of increasingly aggressive decarbonization targets. The most common, of course, is 80 by 50, which is a short term for 80% carbon or greenhouse gas reductions by 2050. Obviously, many jurisdictions have interim targets too, such as 40% by 2030, but regardless, these are aggressive targets that will take a lot of work to achieve. In order to begin that process, policymakers have started grouping greenhouse gas emission sources into 3 broad categories. And this helps with identifying strategies for reducing those emissions within each sector. Commonly, those are grouped into the 3 on the slide, so energy supply, transportation systems, and building systems. And I don't need to tell you all this, but achieving that level of reduction will require really transformative solutions for each of those emissions categories. Next slide. So luckily, a number of efforts have already begun to identify and recommend policies and programs and technical solutions that can help achieve that type of transformation. And Sarah touched on a bunch of those at the top, particularly some of the CNCA energy systems transformation projects, which really set the groundwork for how we talk about this type of project. I might add to that list an ongoing project we're doing with the Innovation Network for Communities, Inc., and CNCA, and the Cresby Summit and Energy Foundations that is focused more on the intersection between energy transformation and equity planning. And I was excited actually to see we have a few people from UC Boulder on the call, because you guys have done some really interesting work on that front too. But this project kind of characterizes the ways to improve social equity as a result of this systemic change. And we're anticipating we'll have some final reports from that process in April or May, so we'll be sure to send them your way once they're available. But regardless, each of these efforts have identified numerous large-scale solutions for how to reduce emissions in each of those broad sectors. And most of those solutions are already being implemented or could be implemented using today's technology. So a few I highlighted on the slide here include leveraging franchise agreements to encourage utilities to scale up the procurement of renewables or the mix of renewables in their generation portfolio. So Boulder has done a lot with this, and also looking into municipalizing, as has Minneapolis. Aggregating demand is another common one, generally called community choice aggregation. It allows municipalities to select an electricity provider, especially one that uses renewable energy to meet the demand of their residents, businesses, and municipal accounts. And this can enable municipalities to leverage demand for the purpose of negotiating lower prices, pursuing renewable energy goals, or a combination of those two. Of course, structuring large-scale municipal power purchase agreements is a common strategy. DC recently had a big wind PPA that went through, I think, in Pennsylvania. So the PPA model has been around for a long time, but it seems like the scale of those procurements is getting larger and larger as cities try to really transform the energy coming in. Of course, partnering with the private sector for renewable development and procurement is big, or otherwise encouraging the private sector to do procurement on their own. Cities have a lot of leverage, but having that partnership and private capital can go a long way too. And in some cases, implementing energy mandates to achieve this. So I think San Francisco recently adopted a solar mandate for new construction shorter than 10 stories. So these are all just a quick snapshot of kind of the cutting edge of strategies that leading cities are employing for transitioning energy supply. Next slide. And I would add to, just like Sarah said at the top, if anyone has questions or things they'd like to add or chime in, feel free to interrupt at any time. So similarly for transportation systems, we're seeing leading cities increasingly push mode shift through both policy and infrastructural changes. This has been particularly successful in European cities, but it's increasingly gaining traction here. Of course, transitioning municipal fleets to zero emissions vehicles, often electric vehicles, which I'll touch on a little bit more in a minute. Reducing single occupancy vehicle traffic, developing bus rapid transit options, and of course partnering with neighboring communities to address regional transportation emissions, which I think Boulder and San Francisco both have done a lot with recently. Next slide. And then, of course, there are the building systems, which is what this initiative falls into. So among those are reducing building energy consumption through weatherization and efficient appliance changes, transitioning, of course, to renewable heating and cooling systems like we're working on here, mandating efficient operations and appliances in new construction, and utilizing waste heat from industrial processes or through combined heat and power generation. All of those are important and kind of trending strategies for transitioning building systems emissions. But if you go to the next slide, these top three are all fairly significant components of this particular initiative. So the process that we're working on here will contribute to each of those transformative solutions. So next slide. So that's all helpful framing, but it still begs the question that we've had at the top all along, which is how does scaling heat pumps contribute to thermal decarbonization? So generally speaking, renewable heating and cooling is defined as technologies that can utilize renewable energy sources to provide space heating and cooling, domestic hot water, and process heating. And today, there just aren't any perfect solutions available or scalable. Biomass has some controversy around it and can spark heated debates around how to conduct carbon accounting. Solar hot water can be great, but can't serve year-round in most temperate climates. And heat pumps rely on grid electricity to operate. That said, unlike most incumbent heating technologies, heat pumps have the capacity to run on exclusively renewable energy. And that is a big part of why we categorize them as renewable heating and cooling technology. And they contribute to the process of electrification, which is currently being explored in many leading jurisdictions. I'm sure you all got that email from Brett earlier this week with the timely article about the President of California's Public Utilities Commission advocating the need to not only transition to 100% renewable electricity supply, but to actually leverage electricity as a fuel to cut into the market share of oil and natural gas. That, he stated, is what it will take to reach a target like 80 by 50. And it's that same process of electrification that this initiative is driving towards. So next slide. So of course, the method by which heat pumps contribute to decarbonization is clearest at the building scale, where they can directly displace high carbon heating sources, especially oil and propane, and even pair with on-site solar, which together can provide building-wide decarbonization solutions. But for system-wide benefits, those can only really be felt if they're paired with city or regional electricity transformation supply efforts, such as those listed earlier. But each of the core cities involved in this initiative already have significant renewable energy goals, and in general, renewable energy is a few years ahead of thermal in terms of the transition process. So having that in place and then pushing for increasingly aggressive targets and greater and greater percentage of renewable electricity supply in each local grid will just expand those decarbonization benefits, especially as things become more and more electrified, both on the thermal side and on the transportation side. Next slide. Great. So many, in addition to this type of city-scale renewable supply transformation, you need, of course, the high-efficiency heating technology. And of those, these three are kind of the most commonly talked about. Next slide. For widespread residential deployment, generally we consider air source heat pumps and heat pump water heaters to have the greatest near-term potential. And that's largely just due to flexibility and cost for urban areas, though of course ground source has a lot of potential as well. Next slide. So some of the reasons that these two are particularly promising is they can offer year-round performance. So modern cold climate heat pumps provide heat on even extremely cold days, but I'll talk about that more in a minute. They also offer high efficiency cooling, which can help reduce summer load if displacing older air conditioning units and provide greater comfort as summers grow increasingly intense. And they're an extremely flexible technology. They can be adapted to so many different home layouts, sizes, and locations, which is really important for the diversity of urban housing stock. Some common model differences I might quickly run over include ducted, which of course integrate into existing ductwork and utilize standard air handlers to distribute heat, or ductless, which have indoor fan heads installed, which are then connected to outdoor units just through narrow refrigerant pipes that run between. They can also be used to serve a single heating zone, in which case they're commonly more of a supplemental heating source, or multiple zones, in which case sometimes they can be scaled up to serve an entire house, especially if they're integrated into ductwork. It's worth noting that in the Mid-Atlantic region, where DC is, there's a far greater percentage of heat pumps serve a whole home and are ducted. But in other areas, it's a little bit more common that they're supplemental or partial heating solutions. Next slide. So as a technology, though they also run on electricity, air source heat pumps are fundamentally different than electric resistance in that, and actually than most counterfactual heating systems, in that rather than creating heat, they transfer heat in and out of a building. So the technology that they run on is functionally pretty similar to a refrigerator, which of course has coils on the bottom that are usually hot to the touch if you were to bend down and touch them, and that's because they're transferring heat out of the inside of the fridge and distributing it just out in the space around it. And the heat pumps kind of do that in reverse, though they can do it both ways. But they use the outdoor air as a heat reservoir to provide heating and cooling and transfer that heat either inside the house for heating purposes or from the house to the outside air for cooling purposes. And because of that ability to transfer heat depends in part on the amount of heat available in the surrounding air, heat pumps' ability to serve a whole heating load can depend a little bit on the climate zone or the season or even the level of insulation or weatherization that a building has. But that's also changing as the technology grows increasingly advanced. Next slide. Let me pause there for a minute before I continue on with the heat pump distinctions. Does anyone have questions so far on what we've covered? All right, forging ahead. So as previously mentioned, these are particularly versatile technologies, and that is in part represented in the price. So a single zone mini split, as it's commonly referred to, can run for about $4,000 for its full installed cost, whereas whole home solutions run up to about $13,000. And so the pictures that you see on that slide, the top is an indoor head of a mini split, and the bottom is the common air handler for a ducted whole home solution. So that kind of range in pricing and corresponding range in applications is pretty unique to heat pumps, which makes them suitable for so many different locations. They're also relatively cost-effective compared to ground source or pellet boilers or some other renewable heating and cooling technologies. Of course, the prices are higher than counterfactual heating systems usually, but it's worth noting that, especially in a place like DC, where most people will want an air conditioning unit in addition to a heating system, getting both in the same unit can save a significant amount of money overall. And with the resulting monthly savings when switching from electric resistance or oil, heat pumps will ultimately pay for themselves despite the higher sticker price. So in addition to the system sizing and zone considerations a homeowner might make when considering heat pump, the most fundamental difference, of course, is between cold climate heat pumps and the older standard models. People sometimes are familiar with heat pumps and occasionally don't remember them fondly. I know in a few of our conversations with manufacturers, they say they run into this all the time where they talk about heat pumps and people remember back in the 1970s having these really inefficient and poorly operating technologies that don't always get the internal house temperature up to quite where they want it. But today's cold climate heat pumps are really a different technology. If you jump to the next slide. So they not only perform really well at low temperatures, for example, the NEAT specifications ensure that they are particularly efficient, so coefficient of performance is COP, and if it's greater than 1, that essentially means that it is releasing more energy than the amount that it consumes. So for every kilowatt hour of electricity that it consumes, it's releasing a greater amount of heat into the air around it. So NEAT specification requires a COP of 1.75 or greater at 5 degrees Fahrenheit, which basically means that these cold climate heat pumps are still operating quite efficiently, even when it's that cold outside.
Hey, Nate.
And then, yes.
Hey, it's your buddy Yinka. Quick question. What is the trade-off of cold climate heat pumps? In other words, why don't we just use them in not so cold climates?
That is a great question, and honestly, other than a small difference in price, I really don't think there is a trade-off. There was a recent study put out by Cadmus, that is what that graph is indicating, or is from, and they did field testing of a number of cold climate heat pumps compared to standard heat pumps in all different configurations, and they found that pretty much at all temperatures, the cold climate heat pumps are outperforming the standard heat pumps. And it looks like the x-axis on that graph is cut off, but that just shows a temperature range from about -10 to 50. And the top line, the blue line, is showing the coefficient of performance, the COP, for cold climate heat pumps at all those different temperatures. And it's just consistently more efficient and operating at a higher capacity. So today, and the Cadmus report mentioned that in posing that question to manufacturers, they say that a lot of this is due to extra research and development in recent years and improved components, and that these are just the newer technology, and so they're operating a little bit better than the old heat pumps, and they're just a more advanced technology. So
thank you.
I did read that I think it was a Navigant study from 2015 focused on the Pacific Northwest that found a single head standard mini split ran for about $4,300, whereas an equivalent cold climate mini split ran for about $4,600, so only a $300 difference. It's a little bit hard to find consistent pricing since there are so many different ways it could be configured to compare heat pumps directly, but that one, it's not a huge sticker price difference, and they certainly have better operation. That's a great question.
Yeah, and I would just want to add to that, which is when we get to modules 3 and 4 and start looking at the co-benefits, you know, this ability to adapt to extreme heat and extreme cold, I think that's a major point for leaning towards the cold climate heat pumps. So that would be something, you know, we will put more explicitly in the co-benefits section, but it seems like another point to consider now.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great point. And Yinka, to your point on that, actually, Sarah, if you go back to that slide one more second. At the bottom right, I note that the NEEP cold climate ratings consider climate zones 4 and higher, which includes DC. So all of these cities, I think, would work really well and benefit from this improved technology.
Hey, quick question. This is Bill in DC as well.
Yeah.
I know that the NEEP list for cold climate heat pumps also includes some traditional split systems and not just mini split systems. Can you say a few words about those?
You mean for a ducted split system?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the barriers we might see is people don't like the head units on the mini splits, and if somebody already has a ducted network in their home and they like to have the distribution sort of network that comes with that to each individual room, answering the concern about that by providing some options for, you know, ducted traditional split systems that are also happen to be cold climate is helpful. And I know there's, you know, a handful of those or more maybe on the NEEP list that meets their standards.
Sure thing. Yeah, there are definitely cold climate ducted systems. I know that in some of our chats with manufacturers, it sounds like the ducted systems are a little bit less efficient, but the assumption there is that it's usually probably due to poor insulation on the ducting. So if paired with good weatherization efforts, then I think they can get pretty close to the level of efficiency of a mini split or multi-split system. But beyond that, I know that NEEP, a recent NEEP study showed that in the Mid-Atlantic region, ducted systems sell at significantly higher rates than split systems, and that sort of flipped in colder areas. So I think for a place like DC, actually ducted systems are quite effective But the Cadmus study, which does that direct performance comparison, was only focused on mini splits.
It's also worth noting, this is Marshall here in DC, and I'll stop the DC monopolization in a second, that to my mind a ducted system is going to have the benefit of a potentially easier sell from a retrofit standpoint. At least that would be what I think, because most people already have perhaps a ducted heating system that's running on a natural gas furnace, and I would think that that you would be easier to talk about just converting that, and what the user experience is pretty much the same versus a different way of heating their home is going to be a harder sell. And related to that, I was curious, the $13,000 whole home solution that was talked about earlier, is that just for that ducted heat pump itself, or is that counting the cost of ducting work that might already exist in a retrofit?
I'd have to double check the source. Oh, go for it, Neil.
Yeah, this is Neil. So I think these are all great points. And I just sort of would note that a lot of the decisions you would want to make on any specific building or even any specific city depends on the existing building stock, right? So generally my sense is DC has a lot of duct work already in place. Thus a ducted system is probably the most logical choice. We do some work in New York where there's a mix of sort of ducted and like wet distribution systems, right? And so a lot of building stock in New York or in places like Boston, where I live, if you're working with wet distribution systems, it'll probably be cheaper and easier just to put in a mini split, right? So I would sort of encourage you to sort of take this on a case-by-case basis. And also, I think one interesting point is as we sort of do the market segmentation, looking at assessors databases or permitting databases, and if we can determine sort of what the existing distribution system looks like on average for your building stock, that'll probably be a pretty good indicator of whether you want to sort of veer towards ducted or veer towards ductless, and sort of look at those different options on the NEEP spec. At the end of the day, I would assume most communities are going to have a mix of both sort of wet and dry distribution systems in their buildings.
Can I just add, when we met with the manufacturers last August or September, an interesting comment that the Mitsubishi rep made was we also ought to think about the difference between replacing systems and displacing systems, and that in some instances we don't have to necessarily replace a system. We might want it to continue to serve as the backup if you're in an extreme cold climate or for some other reasons. It might be that the comfort and other issues that household is trying to solve really boil down to a couple of rooms, and so putting in a single or mini split or a double is enough for them, and that they can have their furnace continue to serve the rest of it if they need to.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that's a really good point. And we need not sort of get locked into a full replacement approach. And in some cases, displacement makes a lot of sense.
Great. Yeah, I also agree. I think I was talking more just about the distinction between the cold climate versus the standard, but certainly there are many other distinctions that can be made or ways that this technology can be adapted. And a lot of the benefits that you'll see will depend on I guess the scale of the retrofit that's needed, and so then utilizing existing heat distribution infrastructure is going to make a lot of sense. But, great. So Sarah, you want to jump to the next slide? So the other main technology we've been thinking about for this initiative are heat pump water heaters, and they function pretty similarly to air source heat pumps, but rather than transferring heat from outside air into air within a room or into ductwork, it transfers heat into a water tank. Excuse me. Those water tanks sometimes incorporate electric resistance elements for high usage times, just because the the heating can take a little bit longer to regenerate, so if you have a whole bunch of people showering at once, it can be beneficial to have that electric resistance backup. But generally, they function quite similarly as an air source heat pump. Next slide.
Can I ask some questions? So you said commonly twice as efficient as electric hot water heater. Do you have it like compared to maybe a condensing gas boiler?
I don't have that comparison offhand, but I can certainly track it down.
Okay, and then the other question around this is kind of saying, you know, I guess this is actually benefit and challenges. Kind of what size building would you say is really the limit of putting in one of these, or are there issues putting in a series of these that larger buildings could take advantage of?
I know that a kind of a standard residential one is usually about a 55-gallon tank, and so I think that would be kind of a multifamily or 1 to 2 family solution, but I think there are larger tanks. Do you want to jump in there, Neil?
Yeah, I was going to say on the condensing boiler, y'all correct me if I'm wrong, but that gets what, like efficiencies of like 90, 95%, is that right? Generally for a condensing boiler?
Yes. Yeah, around there.
So, I mean, yeah, so, I mean, the energy factor, do you remember, Nate, on heat pump water heater, right? Like 2 or 3?
That's right.
So in theory, it is more efficient. There's this really interesting debate that we should wade into at some point about site versus source energy use as well, right? So, you know, a lot of policymakers will try to take into account the transmission distribution losses of electricity that power the heat pump, so they can sort of work back to think about what's the greenhouse gas emission reduction at the site, right? At the, or excuse me, at the source, at the power plant. And sort of is the heat pump operating efficiently enough to sort of reduce greenhouse gas emissions there? But yeah, so I mean, if we sort of look typically at like the AFUE efficiency of like 95% for the condensing boiler, and then look at, you know, efficiency of what, 250 or 300%, that would be the equivalent of the COP. Then strictly at a source basis, yeah, heat pump's more efficient.
Thanks.
I can kind of chime in on the commercial building side of things. Basically, because we studied the commercial buildings in Palo Alto, any small office, 10,000 square foot or smaller, you basically uses almost a residential style hot water heater. When you get into really large, you know, multi-story office buildings, you would have to kind of redesign your heating system and have little heat pumps near major locations where hot water is used. And I would say that for commercial buildings with really high heating demand, like restaurants, hospitals, and hotels, you're going to have a lot of trouble using a heat pump hot water heater with today's technology in order to fix those. And I didn't identify myself. I'm Blake. I'm a engineer, HVAC engineer, and water heating engineer at DNV.
Great. Well, I think that's actually a good transition into some of the benefits and challenges for these that we've outlined here. The residential and small commercial tank sizes, as I mentioned, are usually 55 to 80 gallons. So relatively small capacity, but they can certainly serve a standard residential load. Benefits include pretty quick consumer payback. I think the typical payback is 4 to 5 years when replacing an electric resistance water heater. I'm not sure about replacing a natural gas water heater. I have to look into that. They also provide kind of corollary dehumidification benefits, so especially in a more humid place like Washington, D.C. I think there have been a few studies that have demonstrated that your kind of basement dehumidifier will actually run significantly less when you have one of these in your basement. So there are some other energy savings associated with that. There are a few important challenges, though, to discuss. The most prominent of those being the internal siting. So they, since they draw air right around them, rather than having an outdoor unit as an air source heat pump does, they can have a negative feedback on space heating efforts, both by transferring heat out of the air and into the water and by expelling cool air, especially if they're in a conditioned space. However, they also operate best in places that are between 40 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, so they can't really be put in a completely unconditioned space without suffering some losses. Basements are usually best, but access to basements isn't too consistent in urban areas, so this can be a challenge. That said, they do have major market potential. Penetration in the Northeast is generally less than 1%, so there's a lot of room for this technology to be scaled.
Nate, can I just interrupt to say that Oak Ridge National Lab and P&L have been contracted by DOE to run regional workshops to try to stimulate demand for heat pump water heaters. So they contacted us because they wanted to do one in the sort of Rocky Mountain region. It might be something that we could figure out how to tag along because it brings some additional resources and support and outreach to plumbers and others around this technology.
Yeah, this is Marshall in DC. I want a question about that internal siting issue, which I was thinking about. Why do this is a pretty basic question, I suppose, but why do heat pump water heaters just draw on the air right around them? If you have an air source heat pump as well, especially if it's ducted, couldn't it hook into the same outside air source or an outside air vent instead of affecting the local air?
That's a great question, and one we should probably put to the manufacturers. So if you email me, I'll try to get it on their radar, and we can get a response.
And Neil, there is a company, there's only one that we know of, it's Sonnen, that actually does an outdoor unit that's serving hot water distribution. So there is one available commercially now, and we've had an installation of one of those here in Boulder. So that might be a manufacturer, Neil, we want to add to the mix.
When you say outdoor, you mean the thing is outdoor, or you mean it sources outdoor air?
The condenser unit is sitting outdoors just like a regular heating and cooling space heater or heat pump.
And there are a few different of those manufacturers. We just have a bit of an American problem of not having them here.
Great. So yeah, great questions. Certainly a few things to follow up on there. I was just jotting down a few notes. But I think that's all we had to cover right now for the technologies and kind of the framing initiatives section. Any other questions related to what we just covered before we transition into the advisory committee?
What's the noise differential?
I actually have never personally been around one, so can someone else, if Blake, you've experienced this directly?
This is Bill in DC. I have one of these in my house, and it is very loud. It happens to be in our basement, which is actually separated by about 6 inches of spray foam insulation in the floor joist, and you can still pretty substantially hear it upstairs. So it's not a trivial thing, and it's a very serious thing that we need to keep in mind because it will drive people crazy.
Oh no.
Yeah, not me, other people, normal people.
That's interesting, especially when you think about, one of the projects some folks here are working on as a grid-enabled hot water heater. So the grid would actually tell you to turn it on. So that could be a problem.
There's a very interesting group in West Virginia that's been doing grid-enabled hot water heaters for some years now and showing some great success. So it's very exciting and definitely possible with these heat pump hot water heaters. But you can't. Well, unless there's some new and better technology. I have a GE unit, but you can't put one of these things in a closet in your living room, which obviously also makes it harder from an air exchange perspective. But this question of separating the compressor outside from the tank inside would be one solution to solve that problem.
Yeah, that's something we can pose to the manufacturers as well. Put on one of the additional lists of things for them to think about is the noise factor.
Totally.
Yeah, definitely. Get that on the list too.
Okay, great. So that sounds great. It sounds like everyone's pretty clear on the technical specs then of the heat pumps and what, you know, as you think about how they might match your top building segments, what, you know, what that might look like and how the sales pitches will go and the training. So we'll make sure if you have any specific questions, you know, on that between now and the next video, for your specific locale, make sure that you have, somebody's got to mute out. We've got a party in the background. Thank you. So great, we'll move forward with looking at the formation of your advisory boards, and I'm gonna give a brief intro on how to frame that, and then we're gonna turn it to you all to talk about how you're approaching it and who is in your system. So let's go ahead and look at that. So this is drawing from the last playbook, the Energy System Transformation Playbook in that Integral created. So we're looking at who's all in your local energy system. We would suggest that you start to map the system on you know, a big paper at your next advisory board committee meeting, which should be, you know, in the next week or two between the modules. So you're looking at, you know, first, who is there, and none of these placements are, you know, exact. So some people you wish to influence but don't. So those are the people in your sphere of interest. They might be on the line there. You might be able to influence them a little bit. Then you have people that you actually have a forum for collaborative decision making where you do influence the decision made. Maybe not as much as you would like, but they would be in the middle sphere. And then you have your sphere of control. So those are things, you know, decisions you can make on policy or whatnot without needing anyone else to weigh in on that decision. So this is important, and it certainly becomes important later on when we start to create specific actions, because the actions that you can define are dependent on you know, your ability to affect the certain actors. So you're going to, when we do create the specific engagement and outreach strategies, we're going to work in relation to where these stakeholders are on this map. And so for people that you can't directly influence, you have to have strategies that are moving them more towards, you know, towards being able to influence them, or somehow finding a way to align interests. So we want to, you know, we want to be able to launch at the end of this. So we want actions that are actually targeted in the right way for each stakeholder. So this is sort of a frame. And then you're going to create the larger map there. Then we're going to move into the discussion now. So I want the cities to go around and talk specifically about, I'm assuming most of you have already started your advisory committees, but if not, then talk about how you want to start your advisory committee, who will be leading be the local coordinator, and in most cases it's you, the lead person that's on the phone right now. And then who should be at the table? Who's at the table now, and who do you think should be at the table? And this advisory committee is really going to help you in this process of forming your air source heat pump initiative. And they're going to help, you know, with the quote-unquote homework, and they're going to support you to see the barriers and opportunities as you go along. So typical stakeholders, we've started a list here, but you know, depending on your city, it could be different, but certainly the utilities, we've got home owners and landlords, and in some cases it's building owners, operators, and their maintenance team. We have the real estate developers, the contractors, and of course the installers, manufacturers, and distributors. So we're working with them on a national level, but maybe there's some local offices that you can reach out to as well. And then, you know, community organizations, that might be environmental organizations or advocacy organizations that can help when you are ready to outreach around this campaign. And then, of course, investors when we're talking about going beyond the incentives from the utilities and the manufacturers and the city and bringing in some third-party investment. So those are some of the typical stakeholders that you'll be putting on your map. I know Brett mentioned that Boulder has already begun to do their map. So Brett, why don't you go first and talk about how you're organizing your advisory committee and who the key stakeholders are. And I know that some of them are on the phone, so you can follow Brett by chiming in as well, please.
Thanks, Sarah. So and I'm going to probably ask John and Malika to talk a little bit more about this since they've been doing the work on this. But I think we've really, so we have a little bit of a hybrid right now. Some of our key advisory group are already a part of this. So Clear Result, that Jen Harper represents, is the private sector firm that provides the energy advising services that we do through the city and county. The county, in the case of Boulder, is the entity that actually administers the contract with Clear Result, and then the city provides resources into that process. So those three parties are a part of this group already. And then what we've been doing so far is starting to map the local industry first, because I think that's one of the key constituencies that we want to understand, both in terms of its different parts and then how to reach out to them. John or Malika, would you say a little bit more about who you already have kind of on the map?
Yeah, so we've been looking at the different supply chain actors, or market actors within the supply chain for heat pumps. So we've taken a look at the installation contractors in Boulder at this point, with plans to look also at the manufacturers and distributors. In addition, we're looking to see if there are any heat pumps being supplied via retail channels. And in addition, we're looking at some contractor aggregating services in Boulder. So there's a private company that sort of aggregates bids for different types of technology and offers those as a comprehensive bundle to consumers who are also including on our network of stakeholders.
Yeah, and I think one of the active questions for us is how to engage the utility in this process. We haven't really settled on that. We're in a sort of delicate situation right now with Excel, who's our utility on both the gas and electric side, because the city's in an active litigation with them, and so and they don't even know, I think, yet that we're going to come out with a natural gas retirement program. So that, you know, we're already not particularly popular with them because we're trying to take over their infrastructure. I'm sure that they're going to find it a little bit bemusing at best that we're trying to actually displace their natural gas business as well. So that's one of the other key actors that we're going to need to figure out how to interface with. Elizabeth or Jen, did you want to add anything else around key players that we want to make sure we involve in this process?
I think we've covered just about everybody. This is Jen. I am involving one of our head HVAC guys here from Clear Result, as well as reaching out to some contractors that we have worked with in the Energy Smart program, who are known for having installed several air source heat pumps. They're kind of leaders in the field locally. So those are the folks we're looking at engaging in this process.
And then I think, Brett, just to add to that, this is Elizabeth, we are putting incentives in place, and Excel has put incentives in place for mini splits and heat pumps. And so the market is moving. It's just how many of the contractors and the supply chain is going to fulfill that. And I think, as someone said on the call, that each house is pretty unique for a retrofit. And so I think just building the knowledge in the marketplace is going to take some time, but if we have some willing partners, we'll be able to assist that to facilitate it quicker.
Yeah, and I think one other piece of information that's going to be really interesting that we're working on gathering is what product lines, what manufacturing products are most commonly being installed in Boulder. At this point, the only one I've even seen is Mitsubishi. So it's going to be interesting to see if there's any penetration by other manufacturers in our marketplace, and whether or not any of those other manufacturers like Daikin or Fujitsu even want to try to make a strong play in our area. So I think that's Boulder.
Hey,
okay,
so
who wants to go next? Okay, good.
Yeah, I was going to say this is Yinka from DC. I'll jump in. So I think in some respects we are lucky. First, that within our agency, because the district is functions as a city, in some respects as a state, we have a number of groups that are housed within our agency. So one group that we would definitely engage are program providers. So we have the LIHEAP weatherization program, and we will want their input because they are essentially on the front lines of providing support for the heating and cooling space, specifically around a low income. So that's good. We'll also have the SEU, which is a private contractor that works for the district that provides energy efficiency services to DC residents, and 30% of their budget has to also go to low income. And within that, they also, at least as of last year, contracted with at least 27 contractors that provide services. So I definitely welcome them. Our permitting office, I think, should be at the table as part of the advisory group. They're essentially on the front lines. They know the nuance of the permit world, and they have some expertise as well as to the types of technologies that come through. So I'd welcome them. There's also a heating and cooling association of the district that I think, again, as an industry association, I think their voice would be very welcome. Looking at not only the district, but they play in the regions of Maryland and Virginia. We have relatively few distributors, so maybe not as part of the advisory group, but I do have them on my radar. Trying to think who else we may have. The other one that I'm considering, and some of this I will discuss with my colleagues who will help sort of narrow down the field, are building managers, landlords, etc. I think their input as to what they see relative to heating, cooling, and their challenges would be helpful as we think about programs and even incentives to help make that transition. So those are the ones that immediately come to mind. And Mr. Duabalkin, if you want to jump in with some others, I'd welcome that. And you may be on mute if you are talking.
It's funny to say that I was on mute.
Okay, I suspected it.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent. So Yinka, I think, did a good summary of some of it. I think that we definitely would want to loop in our local we might want to loop in our local BOMA chapter, though they can be sort of small C conservative on a lot of things and may not be terribly excited. On the other hand, they really like our electric company, and so I'm in a way that is occasionally troubling, but that means they might really like more electrification. I don't know. We also have to, we would definitely have to involve a number of the industry associations working with the low-income community as well. That's a little bit of a more fragmented space as well. And something else I was going to say. We also may want to loop. It might be good, I think, in this to get into this sort of stakeholder group. If we can identify local engineers or contracting firms that have done this work and can speak to people's concerns or questions about about this, about how this goes and what consumers in the area are seeing and that kind of thing. And I think the SCU could probably point us in that direction. In my experience, being able to have someone who can speak from the technical standpoint of this is actually not a big deal, or this thing you're not thinking about is a big deal, could also be super helpful. But I don't think we haven't identified who those people or companies would be specifically yet.
Yeah, so I think that will give us a starting point, but ultimately we'll narrow it down to identify what would constitute a core advisory group. But I can definitely see a broad stakeholder group to support this effort.
All right. Well, you guys sound like you're in good shape. Thank you. That's exciting. I like the love for the utility. That's very rare.
Thank you.
No, I'm not saying that we have love for the utility.
Okay.
I'm saying that some people have love for the utility.
Okay.
And anyway.
Okay to love the utility.
All right.
This is Laura from New York City, and I'll jump in here. And I guess I'll start kind of with a question on kind of, what are we thinking about an advisory board? Because I think that we weren't planning on creating like a new kind of group. I think there is a little bit of advisory board fatigue and steering committees and everything like that. But we do have kind of this network of people that we have been really relying on as we really think out these. Our heat pump strategy going forward. So, I mean, is there kind of a definition of what we need to develop in order to meet this requirement, or is it kind of more of a general group that will advise you?
Well, I mean, we trust you to decide that. I know in your office, between you and Jenna and John, you've got and your other colleagues, you have a wonderful group there. So, I'll let the other cities answer. I feel like in Boulder, it's been really helpful for them to have the Clear Results folks, that are kind of already implementing, that have that contact with the customers. But so are there people like that that are already on another advisory committee that you might just tap into, or?
Exactly. I think that's kind of what we would lean towards. I mean, primarily, we have our Retrofit Accelerator program, which, provides assistance to building owners to, complete energy and water retrofits. And in that group, we have, our engineering team, and we have, NICEC, which is our, energy efficiency financing group, organization. We also have like a workforce and training group. So I think that we would probably lean a lot onto that group of people for like the advice to kind of as we think out this kind of heat pumps. So that's probably definitely what we'll kind of look towards. I think that in addition to that, as I mentioned, NYSERDA is doing this pilot project in Brooklyn and Queens right now, and they have been, doing a lot of work around this, so we'll probably definitely be leaning on them as well. And they've been really actually working, I think, with Con Ed on kind of incentives and how does that work. So that's our utility. So yeah, I think it would be definitely mostly the body would be kind of this Retrofit Accelerator group with also kind of this, NYSERDA is actually part of the Retrofit Accelerator too, so it would be Retrofit Accelerator.
Oh yeah. Well, that sounds ideal. You've got it formed already, so that's perfect.
Yeah. And then I think that the last one that I want to throw in there is our group called, it's Pratt. It's kind of part of the Pratt universities here. And they've done a lot of work at kind of retrofit standardization of 1 to 4 family homes in Brooklyn. And so I think that they kind of would really kind of lend like kind of like the small home perspective on this, which I think will be really important since we don't have a lot of organizing bodies for our small homes. We don't have like a, big group of the, the small homeowners here. So yeah, I think that kind of would be providing us that angle.
Okay. Well, that's great. I guess, I forgot about this Retrofit Accelerator program, but you've got a great foundation, so that's great. We'll help, we'll work with what you got. And now Burlington.
So I'll tell a bit of a story. I'll be quick. It all starts with the city's climate action plan. that's been around for over a decade now, led by our very capable sustainability director, who is now housed within the municipal electric utility, Burlington Electric Department. And BED, as Jen mentioned, has two things going for it. One of them is we are 100% sourced renewable today. It's going to be quite a dance to stay there, you know, in the New England market, but our goal is to stay at 100% sourced renewable. And our next trick, again, is to try to transition the city to net zero through buildings, transportation. So we have been really focused through a strategic plan process on how to do that. BED is not only a distribution utility, poles and wires, we are also regulated by the state of Vermont. The state legislature a couple of years ago passed a renewable portfolio standard which has several tiers in it. Tier 1 is put every utility on a ramp to green their mix, and Tier 3 is strategic electrification of buildings and transportation. So we have a mandate that fits so beautifully under the umbrella of the city's climate action plan. And we're also what's known in Vermont as an energy efficiency utility. We're appointed by the regulatory authority to deliver energy efficiency programs, both electric and thermal. And the thermal is to the oil and propane and wood folks. We don't have many, but so we have been incenting both weatherization, now getting into high performance passive house for building envelope and heat pumps, probably going on 3 years now. And we can talk later about some results, some good, some not so good, but we're plowing ahead. And that all coalesces into what I mentioned earlier. We think the 2030 district platform is one that kind of just is a public-private partnership that lays down a platform for so many things to launch off of. And the private aspects of it is great. We have a steering committee. It's growing, getting more robust. It's a good mix of the design community, the engineering community, building owners, developers. We've got a lot more work to do, but we were able to hire an administrator who is through the Vermont Green Building Network, a statewide organization. So there are 4 subcommittees under that advisory group now: buildings and renewables, water, transportation. There's a social justice subcommittee, and we're thinking thermal decarb advisory committee could be one of those, because this technology is just fits right into all of this. So we have, through our energy efficiency utility work, we have a very close relationship with the low-income weatherization program. And as odd as it sounds, the natural gas provides a vast majority of the heat and hot water in Burlington. You know, over 85% of residential and 99% of commercial. So we've got some issues there in terms of just, you know, dollars and cents from the customer's perspective, but we're dealing with that. But we've actually started, if you visit our website, you'll see the Energy Champ Challenge, and it's really the creation of how do we bring a comprehensive set of solutions to customers through both utilities that serve them. So it's multi-pronged, it's multi-layered, but we feel like this is going to fit under our existing activities quite nicely. So I hope that all makes sense. It was a bit of a ramble.
No, yeah, that's great. And I remember from our last meeting with you, you also have some houses that don't have gas, so they might be a good first target. Is that right?
Absolutely. We think we probably have a couple thousand oil, propane, or all electric that we're going to go after first. The other is we're beginning to see in multifamily market rate that heat pumps are the darling choice because they provide, you know, as we said, heat and cooling. They're the lowest first cost option for someone to build when you're looking at traditionally what happens in Burlington is a boiler because, you know, we just don't have a big call for central AC, and this new technology is giving these folks the ability to do something with heating, not having two appliances in a building in apartments, and they're using electric resistance heat as a backup. So we've been able to use our energy efficiency money two ways. One, put in top of the class heat pump, the most efficient you can get, and then we double down on the shell, meaning we really try to go after high performance shells, pre-sheetrock inspections on the insulation, blower door the hell out of the place pre and post, and try to get the building as low load as we possibly can, both to make the heat pump work better, but also not have impacts on our grid. If the heat pump doesn't work, we know that private landlord, and this isn't the knock against the landlord, they're just going to put in more electric heat. They're not going to put in more heads. They're going to do the cheapest option, and then that creates a whole other host of problems that we really don't want. So I hope that makes sense.
It does, and we're running behind, but I do have one more question just on the 2030 district. Do you have homes in there? Because usually those, I understand those to be bigger commercial buildings for 2030 districts.
We've decided to make the entire city the district because we're not that big. We're 13 square miles. Okay. It's a good point. We have to figure out exactly, how most of what happens in Burlington right now in residential is multifamily. We're pretty grown out. We don't have a lot of single-family land. So these are usually larger buildings that are mixed use. There's commercial on the first floor and apartments above. So we think that can fit in the 2030, under that umbrella. But in terms of existing residential homes and moving the needle on those, we got to think some more about that. Okay.
All right, great. So that's perfect. That's really interesting. I can't wait to see the entire city as a 2030 district, and that seems like a great platform. So, all right, thank you, everyone. We got your map started here just by that conversation, and I'm going to pass the baton to Neil to basically bring us home. I am supposed to do the homework after you finish, Neil, but if we run out of time, then that's okay. We'll just point you all to the documents and have you look it over.
Or do we run till 4? Is that correct?
Yeah, I do have, and it's a hard stop for me. So if if you want to go over the homework, I have to run out. It's 1 o'clock my time. But yeah, go for it.
Okay, I'll try to be concise here then. So short story on this slide. I think you guys already know this, but renewable heating across the globe has sort of been slow to take off. There are a few countries that are leading, like Norway and Denmark, and then sort of France and Germany. And what this curve shows, just like a market deployment curve, and shows sort of the state of renewable heat deployment in a number of European countries. We sort of did a study several years ago, and we actually were looking for data on the U.S. and Canada, and there really wasn't much, right? So the general expectation is that most jurisdictions in the U.S. are probably in the pretty early stages. And then based on the best available data we've seen so far, it does appear that sort of heat pumps are the market leader when you sort of compare them to other renewable thermal technologies like solar thermal or biomass. But regardless, there's still a lot of work to do. There's been sort of a lack of policy support, a lack of innovation for renewable heating, including market development. And so the work that we're looking at here to do together is sort of an important next step. So with that in mind, there's a number of barriers that are pretty typical in most markets. And if you advance to one slide, Sarah, we can look at sort of what those barriers are. So these are pretty broad market barrier categories, but I think what would be helpful is as you each proceed among your own cities in sort of analyzing the market, think about these broad categories of barriers and then work with your advisory committee to think through how these specific barriers play out in your unique market context. So I'll walk through these pretty quickly, but we should sort of on a one-on-one basis have additional conversations about these market barriers and then what kinds of strategies you'd be interested in developing to overcome them. So there's a lot of technical and building barriers, chief one being that there's low refurbishment rates for most heating and cooling equipment, right? So most heating and cooling systems are in place for 15 to 20 years, in some places 30 years, right? Interesting thing about heat pumps is because they can serve as a displacement technology, you can sort of help to put a dent and that sort of low turnover for heating systems by using a heat pump to displace part of the load and provide cooling to an end user. In addition, there tends to be inadequate performance data, and this is field data that I'm talking about on how heat pumps perform. So, there's been a handful of studies, and not many, that have looked at the performance data of heat pumps in situ, but there's more work to be done there. I would also note, too, that in a lot of the recent studies we've been reviewing, there's been real challenges getting heat pumps to work in tandem with the existing heating system. And so oftentimes there's sort of operational difficulties that really should be overcome by making sure that the heat pump has the proper controls to integrate with the thermostat or wireless thermostat in the existing fossil fuel system. A wide range of awareness barriers, right? Some consumers just don't know what the heck you're talking about when you're talking about heat pumps. Some think about the old technology from the 1970s, as Nate mentioned early in our presentation, and so overcoming some of those awareness barriers. Additionally, I think it's important to think about how you target customers so that you can sort of find the highest value customers. So even if some folks are aware of them, the economics might be so poor compared to natural gas that your sort of marketing efforts are best spent on oil or propane customers, like I think I heard Burlington mention that they're doing. Additionally, poor awareness among policymakers as well about thermal energy impacts. Obviously, this crew here is on the cutting edge of addressing a heating coolant load. A lot of economic barriers, again, high installed costs relative to a conventional fossil fuel system can be a barrier, especially for whole home solutions. Inadequate return on investment also can be a challenge depending on the counterfactual or the fossil fuel system it's displacing. And then a number of homeowners or building managers will just have capital constraints, right? So we'll need the right financing programs to help them deploy heat pumps. Decision-making barriers, so ownership priorities and split incentives tend to be a big deal. So it's just like inefficiency, it's tough to get to the rental market. So how do we sort of work with landlords to address that? I find this among a number of affordable housing building managers and developers. They tend to have a lack of confidence in the technology. They want to know how this will perform, right? And unless we have the data to back it up, it's very difficult to make a compelling case. And as I mentioned before, there tends to be a lack of great performance data. So some cities might be interested in sort of metering or monitoring performance of heat pumps and trying to build sort of an investment quality data set over time during their pilot program. And then the supply chain barriers as well. So insufficient local contractor base. I think, Brett, you mentioned, as far as you know, only Mitsubishi's active in the Boulder market. How or can or should we be trying to get more manufacturers and their contractors engaged in the heat pump marketplace in Boulder and in other cities? Staff training requirements for operations and maintenance. Again, sort of an issue for sort of multifamily units. And then just simply inefficiencies in the supply chain that can drive up costs, right? And so there are a number of programs out there. We're running one with Boston and some New England cities right now trying to aggregate demand and try to help reduce the installed cost of some of these systems. So a wide range of barriers and also a wide range of potential solutions we could explore together. So on the next slide, 31. As I mentioned previously, it would be worthwhile, I think, for each of the cities to sort of think about these barriers and think about how they play out in their own marketplaces. I would fully expect there to be some variation depending upon the infrastructure in your city, the fuel prices in your city, as well as the strength of the supply chain, for example, in your city. So typically we sort of have three approaches that we can take to sort of build out this kind of barriers analysis. One is, I'll start at the bottom, one is expert interviews, right? So just calling up contractors who are already doing a lot of work in the heat pump market and sort of work with them to understand which of these barriers are sort of most acute and where they're looking for the most help. 2 would be targeted surveys, where you can sort of get a much broader reach in the marketplace. And once you sort of have a pretty good sense of the barriers, you could run a pretty comprehensive survey across industry or building stakeholders and get them to sort of rank and rate the barriers for you and gives you a sense of how severe any one barrier is and where you might want to spend most of your effort as you sort of kick off any plan to develop policies or programs to address them. And then the facilitated workshops actually is a great way to get a deeper sense of the barriers. And if you can get like manufacturers and contractors in the room, along with building managers, right, and policymakers and other experts, you could sort of foster a pretty robust conversation and sort of get these folks to play off one another, and you can get, I think, a lot more granular perspective about what barriers are most significant and how you may want to address them. So as an immediate next step, we sort of propose that the city leaders work with their advisory committees or their network of stakeholders, as the case may be, to conduct some initial outreach and sort of think through issues and options related to these barriers. In addition, you can sort of take the building sort of assessor data and the permitting data and that we're sort of all looking at together, and sort of, I think with those sort of facilitated conversations and those data sets, you can really begin to unpack what the challenges are in your marketplace. So that's sort of how we generally frame up, understand the barriers in the marketplace. And maybe we can pause for a minute or two if you have any questions. If not, Sarah or Jim, I can turn it back over to you guys and we can sort of look at the next steps, the homework.
Okay, any questions? All right, you guys are troopers. I did not think this would take the full 2 hours, but here we are. It's 1 minute to. So let's see here. Here's the details behind the homework. So forming your advisory boards, it sounds like you guys are all in good shape there. I also put the specific pages in the previous, the energy system transformation playbook, if you want to read about the characterizing sphere of influence and some more details there. And the city will lead this, and let's see, yes, you want to just make sure to get those invites out to folks ASAP and have a meeting before the next module. The second, conducting the analysis of local barriers, opportunities, the heat pumps, what Neil was kind of just talking about, and we will help you facilitate that. So city will lead and we will support. Working on the data aggregation analysis, the consultants will be leading. The fourth homework is looking at that stakeholder map and then preparing a list of people that you would like us to interview and dive deeper into some qualitative research and what we need to find out. So also developing the list of questions. And then fifth, researching local case studies of the installed heat pumps in your area. So this is looking at the installation baseline. And the city will lead with the support from the consultant, and the consultant will then compile the case studies.
This is Laura. Sorry, I just have to jump off, but thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got to run too, but if you have any questions, I think Jim or Neil and Nate can answer them. Otherwise, we will wrap it up. All right, well, thank you. Thanks, Meister. It's been really fun preparing this material together, and we'll be in touch with you all between now and Module 2.
Great. Sounds good. Take care, everybody.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.